Hi there, and welcome to Real Estate Divas. I'm Jaylee Thompson with Texel Real Estate.
And I'm Kristen Gerst with Capricorn Mortgage Investments. That actually went pretty well.
Today we're going to be talking about Section 8 and the advantages of Section 8, renting to Section 8, having those type of tenants, and investing in
and
Section 8.
real estate.
Yeah, Section 8 real estate.
We're not talking about Section 8 where you go crazy in the military.
No, we're not talking about that. But anyway, Section 8, a lot of investors out there kind of get scared.
They do.
By just the mention of it. I know not only investors, but a lot of my clients, when I manage their properties, they're like, absolutely not. So we're going to kind of highlight the things.
You know, the thing I hate about it is that Section 8 tenants get such a bad rap.
Yep.
And
Agreed.
People just think, oh, they're going to be dirty, they're going to tear up my property. You know, and in my experience, I actually had less problems with Section 8 on a whole, percentage-wise.
And I remember you telling me that. You know, I've had a little bit of experience with the Section 8, mainly because most of my clients have always opted not to do it. And that was part of it. That's the reason I lack experience there. But you built a whole business around it.
Yeah. And especially in a recession or a down market, Section 8 is the way, you know, landlords want to go, especially if they're new, right? And maybe they don't have the cash flow or the ability to really
carry that property if
property.
it's vacant, or if somebody loses their job. I mean, that's a real issue right now. You know, so many people getting laid off, and the layoffs are not stopping.
No, and as it continues further, yeah, you're going to want a tenant in there. Section 8, it's government-backed rent, and so the government direct deposits into your account the first of the month, and you know exactly how much you're going to have, and it's going to cover it's going to at least cover your mortgage net and, you know, taxes, insurance.
Now, what made you start to get into that sort of thing, into that section of investing?
I fell into it. The first tenant that I looked for in my very first rental property was a Section 8 tenant, and she said, well, do you take Section 8? And I didn't even know what it was.
I don't know.
I had no
I guess.
idea. You know, and so I go, well, okay, yeah, just tell me what to do. And, you know, it was filling out a packet of paperwork, turning it in at the office, and it was pretty
done
easy.
and done.
Done and done.
So now I know that, you know, there's more regulations. I know that my experience with Section 8 is we're talking about people who are unemployed, financially unable to, you know, pay their rent. They're getting government assistance for their rent. They have to apply and qualify.
Yes, and in some cases they do have jobs.
Yeah.
So the mandate is that the Section 8 tenant has to pay something. Has to. But what I've found is, depending on the housing authority, not all Section 8 tenants do. So sometimes, you know, instead of giving them a utility check, you know, maybe they just say, all right, well, you're responsible for your utilities, but you're not paying your landlord anything. So again, it just depends on the housing authority.
And what they probably, just like anything else, just like with unemployment checks, it depends on what you make and what your needs are as far as what they're willing to cover.
What you'll, you know, and what you might be able to, what you might actually be able to qualify for. Because if you need, I'm sorry, are we good? I'm going to ask.
Is it off or on?
On.
Okay. Is it the mic button at the top? Is it switched?
It's Mike.
We're having a little technical difficulty right quick.
This is mute. This is unmute.
Okay. Well, we're picking you up. It just sounds like shit.
Okay. Good to know.
So use that theater voice. Project.
I need to project and get picked up by Jay Lee's mic.
Yeah.
So
I'll lean in.
I'll just be a little louder. So anyways, yeah, you know, a lot of times they will have a job, but it's just not enough to cover any amount of rent. You know, maybe they're only making, you know, $400, you know, a week, or, you know, even less than that. And so they need to have a way to pay their rent, and so they get accepted into the Section 8 program.
And so it's really the government agency that is direct depositing that into the business, your business account or whatever account you get
Yeah,
them.
whatever account you choose.
Yep.
So, yeah. Okay.
And then don't mind what's going on down here.
It's just so great. It's like Ed.
You know what?
I know.
All we need is a couple of ferns.
Yeah, we're really and truly.
Or a
Yeah.
ficus.
All right. So anyways, yeah. So, I mean, I love Section 8 just because I knew that I was getting my rent the first of every month. The other advantage, that I really saw with Section 8 tenants on the government is the government wouldn't allow felons into the program. So I wasn't having to go, gosh, is this person a criminal going in?
Well, and that's one of the biggest myths that we come across when it comes to Section 8 is that most people are considering, they're thinking that we're dealing with some really bad people.
Right.
And you're just talking about people, and families that are down on their luck, unemployed, looking for jobs. Maybe they don't have the jobs. Maybe a mother that got pregnant,
she's got, 3 kids. She's not married. She's not getting child support.
Yep.
And what does she do? She's got to stay home with them. She can't, she can't hold a full-time job.
Yeah, well, you can't hold if you've got 3 small kids, I mean, the cost of that is outrageous.
Yes.
If you're trying to stick them in daycare. But, I mean, that's a good point, is that they go ahead and they field them and make sure that you're not dealing with...
And I did have a couple instances where, the Section 8 tenant, who, by the way, is usually female. Mm-hmm. And, these women are targets in the community because they've got a roof over their heads. A lot of times it's a lot nicer than, say, government housing, where people go while they're waiting to get on Section 8.
Yep.
It's a house somewhere. It's
in a nicer, it's more room.
So they are so I've had a couple instances where I said, hey, every time you leave to go to work during the day, your boyfriend is out selling drugs in front of the house.
Oh, wow.
So,
yeah.
And the first, the first time I ever made that call, I'm like, oh, I wonder what she's going to do. And this woman was like, oh, hell no.
Yeah.
And she had him out that day.
Wow.
And she's like, I will not, she goes, I'm not risking my Section 8
for that. Well, and like you said, it takes a while to qualify. There is a holding pattern. It's not just you qualify and you go out there and you get an apartment or get a house with your Section 8 voucher. I mean, 1, it takes a while to get qualified for that. 2, then you've got to find a property that's willing to take it, because there are so many misconceptions out there about what that tenant looks like, how much more destruction is going to happen to my property because I just rented to a Section 8.
Right, and so let's talk about the destruction part, mm-hmm. because the destruction part is, you've got to enforce your lease. But I had an instance where, I kept calling, because I said the Section 8 tenant is moving out. And so, I was waiting for her to contact me to come pick up the keys. Finally, she texts me and says, the keys are under the front mat. And I'm like, oh my God. So I drive over there, and this place is a wreck. I mean, there's trash all in there. There's trash in the front yard. I took photos of it all, and I went in and presented it to her Section 8 case manager. And that case manager said, you are going to pay for all of this.
Yeah, any cleanup, any damage.
And she said, and she looked at me and she goes, well, I don't have that kind of money. And she goes, well, can you do a payment plan? And then the Section 8 caseworker looked at me and said, are you willing to accept a payment plan? And so we put her on a payment plan of like $100 a month, for,
wow.
I think it was like 18 months, and she's just like, you should be very thankful that she's even willing to put you on a payment plan. And I'm thinking, I'm just happy to get
something.
Get any money
Well,
out of
because
this
had
woman.
it been a regular tenant that did that and, they skated on you or something like that, there really isn't, yeah, you can chase them down. Yes, you can ding their credit. Yes, you can take them to small claims court. But the likelihood that you ever see anything,
Nothing. Well, because
Slim.
likelihood is that they don't have anything.
Well, there's
right,
that
and so
too.
you're pulling it from their deposit.
Yeah.
In this case, yeah, it's so Section 8 will, if you bring in documentation right away, they will back you. And again, I preface that with saying not all housing authorities are created equal.
Yes.
So, but a lot of them will hold their feet to the fire because, there's a huge waiting list for Section 8.
Yeah, if you can't maintain the property and you don't appreciate that you're in this position to begin with, then they'll write them off and say next. Somebody else would be super grateful for the opportunity.
Well, and Section 8 knows that it's hard to get landlords to
agree
to rent their property to a Section 8 tenant. So they are not, they will not let those tenants destroy property or make a bad name for Section 8.
So that right there is a huge nugget for anybody out there who is considering it, or maybe you were on the fence, or maybe even a realtor or a possible tenant has contacted you and wanted to know, hey, do you offer this property at Section 8? This is something to look into. It's guaranteed. I know that one of the properties that I worked with where they had the Section 8 tenant, and we agreed to the Section 8 tenant. It was Section 8, and they were giving up. The mother was pregnant, and she was giving up the baby to adoption.
Okay.
And so not only was it Section 8, but then the adoption agency is paying for a portion of it as well. And so it was guaranteed money. I mean, that was deposited on a monthly basis. The woman did act up right after she had the baby. And
Which is kind of understandable.
yeah, a little bit. But as soon as it was over with and we reported it to those agencies, I mean, they took care of it immediately.
Well, and I think you'll find that that's pretty typical. Thus, people always ask, because, when the market crashed in '08, I had 61 doors.
Dang.
All rented Section 8 that I was self-managing. And so when you've got that number, people are like, how do you attract a Section 8 tenant to your rental? And one of the number one things, because I knew that Section 8 would force them, right, to keep the property nice. And by the way, there's also periodic inspections of their property.
Yes,
during the year. And so if they inspect that property and find out that, and it's surprise inspection. So if they show up and they are not keeping that house clean and sanitary, or if if they've already found damage, they are going to put them on notice and make them correct those issues right away. Otherwise they're out.
Good to know.
Yeah. So, but knowing all that, knowing that they were going to be held to a higher standard and that somebody was actually going to be checking up on them, I always made my deposits $50. And,
oh, gotcha.
And I did it for a couple reasons. One, a lot of people think, oh, because it's a Section 8 tenant, I should
charge more.
But knowing that you've got somebody watching your property, right? The agency's watching it. I always said, okay, well then I could charge less, so $50. But when you come up around to renewal, if they wanted to leave your property, right, they can leave one time a year. Mm-hmm. So I found that having a $50 deposit, they didn't have that deposit money saved up to move to the
next property. So they stayed. Yeah.
Because how are they going to come up that all of a sudden they're like, okay, well, I want to move to somewhere new, but wow, this deposit's $250 or this deposit's $500. I'm only going to get $50 back from her.
Yeah, if that. I mean, now I would think that would be pretty much non-refundable. But I mean, most deposits on any decent property is going to be $500 and up, or the same price as what your first month's rent is. And some people do deposit first month and last month.
Mm-hmm. But for Section 8 renters, I always said, if you want Section 8 and you want guaranteed rent, just lower those deposits.
Interesting.
And it is. And I would only do that for Section 8 renters. I wouldn't do that for a
regular renter. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, and
well, there's more risk there, which is odd to say because most people think Section 8 risk. Those two one does not equate the other. And so, I mean.
Yeah, you know, I mean, obviously with 61 doors, I went through a lot of Section 8 tenants, you know, over a period of several years. And when I think about, you know, those tenants, I had one that was, we'll call her a criminal, I guess. You know, it's an interesting story. I figured out what she was doing. So she had a Section 8 house, and she wasn't living in it. She was charging somebody else rent, was fully paid for, and then, yes, she was a prostitute over at this other part of town. So, and I figured that out when I had to come. She asked me to come pick up her rent one day, and I was like, "Oh my word, what's going on here?" I'm like,
I guess it's been a minute since we've done like live stuff because we used to say allegedly a lot just in case.
Allegedly she was prostituting.
Allegedly she's a criminal. Allegedly she's a prostitute.
Right. Allegedly. All right.
And
well,
I'm not a lawyer.
Allegedly, I drove up. And she's standing there handing me rent, and she's scantily clothed. And all of a sudden, this guy is driving.
And he thinks he's getting a twofer.
Yeah, he's driving, and he slows down. And she goes, "Baby, keep driving. We're not slinging ass here."
Oh,
in that situation, it was your story. So in my recollection,
I'm
yeah.
not a lawyer to this, and I can't.
At that point,
the legalities of that.
Right.
Yeah.
At that point, when she said we're not slinging ass here, I was like, "Oh my God, I think they're slinging ass here."
Well, it's kind of like that old saying: if you're having to say I'm not doing it, chances are you're doing it.
You're doing it.
The first real estate divas T-shirt. We're not slinging ass here.
We're not slinging ass here.
Oh
like,
my gosh!
Jesus.
I think we do need a shirt.
And here's
funny.
me, you know, and I'm like 29, 30 years old, and I'm like, hi,
What? I thought it was weird I had to come to this corner to get paid, but now.
Oh yeah. So, you know, other than that one, I could say that everybody was pretty much on the up and up.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, she was a character.
Well, I mean, she was trying to be resourceful. So
She was extremely resourceful.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, I bet she's charging money to whoever is it. Because I went to that door and I'm like, who is this?
Yeah.
It's not who I was. And she's like, oh, that's my sister. She'll be back soon. I'm like, your sister's slinging ass down the road. But anyway, yeah, number one, I mean, they do background checks.
Yeah.
So no felonies, which is
Nice.
good, and no drug convictions. So that's a huge one.
That is a huge one.
Because you don't, if you get a drug dealer into your property, that is, it's a recipe for disaster. And they will tear up the property. Bad things happen. The police show up. The police tear up the property.
Yeah.
They rip off
But
moldings.
that's also that happens with regular rentals. I mean, I've had that issue with rentals before.
I know.
And you do the background check and you do the credit report and all that other to verify that it's going to be a good tenant. They get in there and their boyfriend's a drug dealer, or their sister's a drug dealer, and then it's over with.
This is primarily why I went to Section 8, because I had this lower rent apartment building, that was part of this. And I kept having these little old grandmas come up and rent the apartment for somebody. And it's the same drug dealers. We're back in there. And I'm like, you're kidding me. How do I get it?
I just evicted
I
them.
just got rid of these guys. Why are they back? And it was like every time. And I just couldn't get a legitimate tenant. And so that's, with that building, I'm like, all right, I've got to go Section 8 only. So yeah, it's, it's, in my opinion, if you're doing, especially lower income rentals, Section 8 is the way to go.
Well, and now, I mean, part of the reason we decided to do this show, because we've touched on it, we've done one in the past, it's been a while, but also with the times that we're in right now, just how many people are going to be unemployed and going to need that assistance, and there needs to be more outlets out there for them.
Right.
And just to let people know, don't be scared. If you want to know, what does that look like, then contact a Section 8 office and say, okay, what does that paperwork look like? How do I put myself on a list of, yes, I'm available? Because I know working in management as far as rental properties and having my own rental properties and dealing with clients. I don't deal with renters now for the most part, as far as trying to find them a place to rent. But in the beginning, when I'm trying to find clients and I'm hustling, then you deal with quite a few renters because you hope they'll buy later on. Well, there's several that I ended up dealing with or having as clients that they were Section 8 renters, and trying to find them a landlord that was open to Section 8, I mean, it was a needle in a haystack.
So, and people always ask me, where do you find these people? And so when I was a Section 8 landlord, not everybody had access to the internet.
Yeah.
That was number one. And so you had to find that newspaper that's outside laundromats and go find out what newspaper. It's going to be a free paper.
Green sheet.
We have the green sheet. I know Arizona has the green sheet, Texas, a bunch of states, bunch of major cities have it. But there's going to be some free publication. Craigslist is also one, and I believe now Facebook Marketplace would also be a great place
Absolutely.
to do this, because everybody has any place that you can go where they're not going to have to pay for it is the key.
Yep.
So any free listing, even apartments.com, but the key that you want to put into it, like when I would put it in the green sheet, and I would only pay for the print, I would never pay for the online because a lot of Section 8 tenants didn't have it back then. That's changed now.
Yeah, that's
right.
it's
So
a
most
lot
people
different.
have
Yeah.
access to the internet. So you want to probably do more internet than free print. But when you go into it, I always put 2 stars around it, and I just put Section 8 welcome in all caps. And that was how I started my blog. And whatever my marketing I was doing, just Section 8 welcome. And then I'd list the amenities. And then, I often wouldn't put the deposit in there because, if a regular rent person contacted me. But Section 8 welcome was the number one important thing.
Well, just to chime in, just because I feel like y'all want me to, and I love my voice. You were talking about the benefits to having Section 8 in these times. Well, I think the most obvious is depending on how doom and gloom you are, it's almost a safe way to hedge your bets.
Yes,
exactly.
Because if the government is not going to pay, well, we've got a lot worse problems than
then your property going into foreclosure,
Right.
or you not being able to carry it.
Right, because
Yeah.
if you have regular tenants, because obviously I feel like y'all are a little Me Too-ish against the regular tenants. Like you're a little regular.
I got
a little regular.
I got to be honest.
No.
I was a little,
Yeah,
I was a
the
little
regular.
against regular. I was, when I was a landlord, by the time I finished, I think I sold off my last rental property in 2012. I'd been doing it, 7 years. And by the time I got to that point, I would never have taken a regular rent tenant.
Right, but the main point I was just chiming in is if on the regular tenants right now, say you have somebody who's got a great job right now.
Correct.
And then because a lot of, we've had private conversations where, with non-performing notes, there's no reason they should be at 80%. There's no reason the stock market should be where it's at. The only reason is the government's propping up because it's an election year. So post-election, who knows what's going to happen?
And I
so
think
your
we all know that.
regular renter that has a great job may not have
that great job.
Yeah.
And what do you do there? Because
Yeah.
it's not, and I think I know there were a lot of landlords over in Fort Worth, right, suing because of the moratorium on evictions.
Yep.
And they're like, I gotta get this person out, and I've got to get somebody in there who can pay me. because I'm going to end up losing this property.
Well, and that's the thing is you have a lot of mom and pops out there that are carrying, 1 to 10 properties or something like that. And if all 10 of them stop paying rent at the same time, they still have that mortgage. They don't get a variance on or waive on that mortgage just because somebody stopped paying them. So
Yeah,
I'll jump in one more time and then I'll get back to y'all just because it was an amazing experience. So I recently had a conversation with one of the guys that works with me because he was like, so you do real estate? I was like, well, not really, but I kind of, y'all know who I am. I hate it.
I know it.
Anyway.
Yeah.
But and he's one day wants to buy a house. I was like, well, right now is not the best time. He's like, well, why? Well, here's what happens. Say you buy a house. Say you buy a duplex. You live on one side. The other tenant pays for the whole thing, and that life is good, and you're on your way to becoming a real estate investor. But during Corona, what happens when that person doesn't pay? And then what happens when you can't evict? And then you can just see because this person has never really, seen the other side. Because most people, not investors, most people think, oh, it's Bank of America, Chase Bank that owns all these properties. They can afford not to collect rent.
Yep.
For
And
a few
that's not-
months.
yeah.
Right.
But that's not, that's not the case.
That's not what you're
But it was
usually dealing
great
with.
seeing his eyes go,
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, and in 2008, 2009, I credited Section 8 for me because I never missed a beat.
Yep.
I had 100% of my, rent collected every month. So it was a wonderful place to be when I'm watching real estate investor after real estate investor bankrupt.
Yep.
And I'm like, well, I'm great. I just have to find like the next new thing to do because nobody's lending money. But other than that, yeah. So when we did this show the last time, I've had, ongoing conversations all year long with this one Section 8 investor or a real estate investor out of Tennessee who wanted to get into Section 8. And his biggest complaint was that Section 8 wasn't paying the monthly, the highest monthly rent that he could get from a regular tenant. And that is a thing. I got to be honest, depending on where your property is, Section 8 decides what the reasonable rent is. So that one you do have to be careful on. However, I learned how to game it. Allegedly how to game it. Well, no, I did game it. I learned how the Section 8 system works. So a lot of times, depending on how big the county is from where you're at, find out how many Section 8 authorities there are and how they figure out how to go about, deciding what the rent is. Most Section 8 authorities do it by zip code. So you can go into zip codes, especially here in Dallas, right?
Yeah, Dallas-Fort Worth
where
area.
if you find a zip code that shares it with a suburb, oftentimes that reasonable rent is going to be much higher because the suburb is going to have higher rent than the city of Dallas.
Interesting.
Depending on where it's at. Down in Mesquite, Box Springs, Garland area. So and knowing that, just knowing to make sure, where that's all at. The other thing is certain vouchers pay more. So find out if there is a, special type of voucher in your area. Here in North Texas, we have the Walker program. And so
I'm not familiar with that
No,
one. What
so
is
if
that?
you get a Walker voucher, they pay almost double what the reasonable rent is expected for the family because they wanted to get these Section 8 tenants out of the city of Dallas and up into northern suburbs. And so to get them, more integrated. So they had these Walker vouchers out and it would pay almost double the rent.
Wow.
So again, talking, because it's different around the nation, but this paperwork that you fill out is the same paperwork that you fill out at every single housing authority, with the exception of maybe one form. Everything is the same. And we have 16 housing authorities in the Dallas-Fort Worth. We have 16 housing authorities. There might even be more on the other side of Fort Worth. I've dealt with about 8 of them, and all of the paperwork is the same, and all of the paperwork comes from the government.
Well, there you go. You could definitely systemize it. If it's the same paperwork, you're basically changing addresses.
Well, and the question is, if you're looking at, you've got this nicer house, right? You really do want to do Section 8 because you want to have guaranteed rent. You're probably going to have to make a decision. Okay, do I take a little bit less on this, but I'm safe?
Well, but I get my nut is covered. I'm still making money, and it's going to be covered every single month.
Right. And, and if that's for an existing property that you have. But if you're, also looking at it going, all right, she's right, let me go look for a specific house in a specific neighborhood that would fall under Section 8 at this higher rate, where I could pick up
that's
a
where
less
you start
expensive
scouting out properties.
Exactly. So, and you're probably not alone there, but, being a lower rent neighborhood, you should be able to pick the houses up for cheaper.
Yeah.
So cheaper house, higher rent. And again, it's just one of those things you have to go out and kind of work at if that's...
Well, and also it's not any different than any other type of investment. Once you decide what you want to zero in on as far as a rental property or what area or what type of property you want, then you're doing your research. It's kind of the same as pulling your comps. Now you've just added one small step to that of, okay, let me contact Section 8, see what all this, see what it looks like, how they've rated and calculated all the different rents in these areas, and now I'm going to zero in on this area.
Right.
So it's just doing homework.
The other thing to remember are the number of bedrooms. So there are not a lot of 5-bedroom properties out there. And more importantly, smaller houses that are 5-bedroom properties. They might want a 5-bedroom because they need separate rooms for each of their kids. But they don't necessarily want a 3,000, 4,000, or 5,000 square foot house. They think they might until they get their utility bill.
Oh, absolutely.
And their utilities are way above what they can afford. So really finding that 4 and 5 bedroom house
that's smaller.
Well,
that right there tells you, okay, a lot of investors steer away from converted garages. That would be one instance where when you're going out there looking for properties and people are steering away from the converted garage property because they're like, I don't really want that for a rental,
Yeah.
then this is when it would be perfect.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, yeah, go ahead.
I was just saying earlier, sorry to break the chain of thought, but earlier you're talking about like in Dallas or Fort Worth, there's 16 different agencies, right?
Yeah, and that might actually just be around Dallas County.
Right.
Dallas County, Collin.
So Section 8, that's a federal thing though, right?
It is, but they rely on each municipality to administer it because it's too big of an oversight for the government to do every town, every city.
So is it kind of like one of those things where they have like, and again, I'm not familiar with Section 8 at all, but say they have like 100 checkpoints for standard and then they allow the next 100 to be done on the local level? Or is it like the overarching theme is federal?
Right. The overarching theme is federal. I don't know how the government decides how many vouchers go in every single... Yeah, I don't understand that. I can tell you that you'll figure out real fast who gets the most vouchers. I know that that's Dallas Housing, which is the city of Dallas. We also have a Dallas County. We have a Tarrant County. We have a Collin County. The city of Plano gets a lot of Section 8 vouchers, surprisingly. The city of Grand Prairie gets a lot. The city of Mesquite gets a lot.
Yep.
Every single one of those housing authorities has different rules. The city of Mesquite, you cannot get a Section 8 house that is not in the city of Mesquite. The actual
city.
It has to have a Mesquite address.
Yep.
But Plano, you can get a Section 8 house anywhere you want. You could have one down in Waxahachie if that's what you wanted, and you've got a Plano voucher.
Waxahachie.
Because they don't want them in Plano.
Well, maybe. I don't know. You're still getting tax dollars, and I don't know what they're getting. I'm sure they're getting something for this.
Yeah.
Administering it, but he might be a little right there. I don't know. I don't want to go there. I want to just pass on that.
And I think they have like one of the largest police budgets in the DFW area as well.
That's about right.
I don't know, but I'm just assuming.
Allegedly.
Allegedly.
That's one of those things I saw on the internet but never fact checked.
Yeah.
And then I'm not even going to fact check that I saw it on the internet.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
heard it.
But I'm going to throw it out there
I'm going to
anyway.
throw it out there. That's fact.
Hashtag facts by Ryan.
Yeah.
Hashtag unchecked facts that are now
By
fact.
Ryan.
I think
By
that's your
definition of
new
facts.
YouTube show.
Yeah.
Unchecked Facts by Ryan.
Dude, that would be great. Unchecked facts.
All right.
So what are some of the qualifications? Like, I know that they do inspections, and sometimes that scares off investors as well.
So the basic, I don't know, timeline for this. One, you've got to have a house that, is neat, orderly, safe is the number one important thing. You get a tenant. The tenant has to choose your property. So
Yep.
you can be on a list and you can say, oh, I'm a Section 8 landlord. That does not do you anything.
Yep.
You have to have a Section 8 tenant who wants to rent your property. Once they do, and the first thing I ask just to save time, because there's tenants out there just kind of tire kicking, seeing what they can get.
Yep.
I always call before I meet with them, do you have your landlord paperwork? Do you have your packet? Because that tells me they've already been to their meeting and they have, I think it's only like 30 or 45 days
To find
a
property.
place, otherwise they lose their voucher. So, and a lot of them don't get started right away, and so then you get these desperate people who are like, okay, I'll rent anything because I
In a
don't want
week.
to.
Yeah.
In a week, because I don't want to lose this.
Yeah.
So, but that's the number one question I ask, just to save time, because I don't want to drive out and meet somebody who's not ready to go right now, because I'm looking to rent it right away. And for every one of these that I put Section 8 welcome, I might have 20 or 30 calls.
Yep.
So you want to pick one that is a good voucher, you
Yep.
know. And so when you're looking at the voucher, to get the price or the highest price possible, you need to make sure that you have the correct number of bedrooms. So a lot of times a 2-bedroom voucher person will try to get your 3-bedroom house.
Oh, but they're only getting paid for a 2-bedroom.
So usually that's a question I ask before I'm willing to meet them as well.
Yep.
Because I'm like, no, you're not, your voucher will not cover this. And even if they tell you, oh, my voucher will absolutely cover this, it won't. It absolutely won't. So I always made sure that I had, if I had a 3-bedroom, I had a 3-bedroom voucher. And I just made sure that that was all right.
Yep.
So once I ascertain that they do have their paperwork, that they have the right voucher, then I agree to meet them and show them the inside of the house. They almost always love it. And I go, do you want it? And they go, well, when is the deposit due? Always back to the deposit. And I say, your deposit is due on the day you move in. And they love that, right? Because they don't have their deposit back from the last place. And then you go, and my deposit's only $50. So instantly they're like, oh my gosh, I can do this. I
can't pass this one up.
I can't pass this up because
Yep.
otherwise I'm going to be out a lot of cash. And so I get their paperwork from them. A lot of times they want you to fill it out and the tenant will go bring it in. But then they've got like some bank information and my, my LLC, number. And I'm like, I don't want them to have that. So from there, it's, I basically took the packet and I'm like, all right, I'll get it turned in tomorrow. There's some other documents that you have to have with it, saying who's going to be managing it. Even if you're self-managing it, you have to say, I am blah, 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 the manager for this property. It's just one page.
Yeah. Information sheet.
Easy Word doc.
Yep.
And I would print it off and put it in there. You have to have a copy of the warranty deed that is recorded.
Gotcha.
At the recording office. So you have that. And again, I would just have all of this stuff.
Well, yeah, if this is what you decide to specialize in, then you've got your Section 8 packet already set to where you're basically changing tenant names and changing addresses if you have more than one.
And then their main form is just one that's filled out in triplicate. So, and you do have to handwrite it out. But, people are like, oh my gosh, I could never fill out this packet, right? Because it's like this. It's basically questions like how many bedrooms, how many bathrooms, what's your square foot, what's the address?
I would think, kind of like most documents, federal documents and things like that, there's a lot of repeat.
all the time.
because they're just verifying that what you're saying is kind of like taking a personality test, that it's just reworded in a different way.
Right.
And
I
it's the
certify
same
that I'm the
information.
owner.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's always the same questions throughout, and there's probably 5 or 6 forms. So
Gotcha.
it's super easy. So once you turn that in, depending on the housing authority, how backed up they are, it was usually about 10 days, 7 to 10 days to get them out to inspect. As soon as they inspect, I let them into that property. I'm like, okay, inspection's done. It's passed.
Come on in.
Come on in. Let's sign it. Let's sign the lease. You can move in. And the reason you do that is because Section 8 will pay you from the date of that first
Move in.
move in. So if they move in on
The 18th,
they will
they will pay that section of rent and then pay
And
the
then-
next month's rent.
and then a year coming up.
Yeah. Well, so one of the things that I know a lot of investors kind of get a little antsy about is the inspection.
The inspection.
So
And being
what was your
re-inspected.
and being re-inspected. So what was your experience?
Oh god,
Well,
I'm laughing at her stories.
my stories about being inspected and
Remember that one story about you're about to move into Section 8 home and the
oh
house
god.
is destroyed?
Oh god, yes. That was awful. And then she's like, ooh.
Give a 2-minute recap of that.
A 2-minute recap. This one, the Section 8. Okay, so I show up with the Section 8 lady. She's got her packet, right? She saw the house a week before, claimed she had her packet, but didn't.
Yeah.
And she goes, I'm gonna have my packet in a week. Will you hold it for me? And I'm like, 1 week. I'll give you 1 week, right? So we show back there a week. It might maybe not even a full week, 5 days. And I'm like, all right, well, let's go ahead and go sign this inside. And she goes, okay. So we walk in. This house had been spotless before, and I had granite countertops in here. We walk in, and there is no back wall on this house. Somebody has ripped it off.
What?
Yes. Oh,
What,
this
you
is
mean
my
the
worst.
exterior
This is
wall?
my worst. Yes, the exterior wall.
Oh my God.
There's graffiti, like spray paint graffiti all through it.
Oh
There
my
is
gosh.
no fence in the back, so I can see all the way to the back alley. There is a basketball hoop on the side, but the worst part is that you walked in and there was these little smoldering, and it smelled like burnt hair, and it was 5 dogs set on fire.
No.
So yeah, it was my burnt dog house, my dead dog house, and it was
That's
awful.
awful.
But you can imagine the state of shock I walked into.
Yeah, I can't imagine. You think everything's fine. You walk into the house and you're like, what?
And everybody
happened here?
earmuffs because I'm going to say a quote and it's got some profanity in it.
Oh,
and so
profanity,
this
I don't care.
Section 8 tenant walks in with me and she goes, "Oh, someone fucked your house up real good."
Oh my God.
And I'm sitting there going, yeah. And I mean, I'm just shell shocked. I'm like, okay, we're going to get out of here right now. And
Yeah.
and she goes, "Do you have another one I could rent?" She goes, "My voucher expires." And I'm like, "I got one down the street. Let's go."
That one hopefully is still whole.
I'm like, it's even better. It's even better.
Well-
It's fine.
So more of the story: don't hold a property for 5 days.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely, yeah.
Wow.
It was my first
But that
insurance claim I
wasn't-
ever took.
That wasn't, to be clear, that wasn't the last tenant.
No.
Yeah, that was just-
I mean,
that was just vandalism.
That
That
place
was-
was perfect
Yeah.
and so ready to be rented. I mean, it was gorgeous. And then, boom, I was like, I couldn't believe what had happened to that house.
That's crazy.
They had a
town.
fun party over the weekend.
So it's not
That is
necessarily
crazy
a
town.
Section 8 story, but it's a great story.
I know
Yeah.
you love that story. I mean, and then that lady, she was a trip. Yeah. Anyways, so she ended up because her voucher was expiring and she was desperate. She ended up moving in. Ended up moving into like this other one that I had ready down the street, so it was fine.
Yeah.
Obviously I didn't rent that one
No.
right
yeah,
away.
Yeah.
Took a couple
Took a
months.
minute.
Yeah. But anyways, going about the inspections, they are common sense. You can print off what they're going to look at. Ones that you wouldn't, chipped or flaking paint.
Well, and that's typically when we're talking about lower income housing to begin with. If you're an investor, you already know this. But anything built before 1978 probably has lead paint. So therefore, you have to make sure that's covered up, that there's not peeling or chipped paint around the window sills, because they don't want anybody to ingest that paint.
So, and even though they're pretty sure, it's 2020.
Yep.
It's
There's
42 years
yeah.
later. That's probably not lead-based paint that's on there. You still can't have any chipped or flaking paint. They don't want kids eating paint anyways. And, most Section 8 are families. And so you've got kids there. Even if it's an older individual, a lot of times her grandkids
are there.
So, yeah, you can't have that. The doors have to have deadbolts on them. The windows have to be locking.
And we're talking about exterior doors, not interior.
Yes, not deadbolts.
That's weird.
It is weird.
I have been in
I've been in creepy houses like that too, where they had
on the outside.
On the outside of the bedroom
that's
doors. Yeah, I actually bought one of those once. Yeah, they're awful. It was like a 1.5, 2-story, and it had been turned into a 10-room boarding house.
Wow.
Yeah, they built a 2-story addition on the deck that was on those little cement footers.
Yeah.
That was great. Love that house.
By code, I'm sure.
Oh,
I'm sure they permitted
Oh my
that.
gosh, it was frightening to be in it. No, they'll flag you if you don't have window screens.
Yeah.
And again, that's kind of an
That's
annoying
cheap
one,
enough,
but
it's cheap enough.
Exposed asbestos, yeah, I would hope so.
Yeah.
So they're going to make sure that all electrical outlets are covered. So, and that happens sometimes. I've been in a house and it might not even be electrical. It might be the cable, but it doesn't have a wall plate. So you need to make sure that all the wall plates are there. I had one Section 8, tenant or one Section 8 inspector who he actually had a electric multimeter, and he would go test my outlets to make sure. But it was was just one.
Yeah.
And it was fine. But it was funny after the first time when I had one that didn't work. Now I was ready for that, and I'm like, okay, well, I'll have my guys go around and test all the outlets to make sure they work. And it's just making sure that it's clean and habitable.
Clean, habitable, and I'm sure the smoke detectors in all the rooms and that sort of thing.
They have a little stick that they walk around with. They test to make sure the batteries.
Yeah.
And again, those are cheap things too. You can buy a smoke detector for a couple bucks.
Well, and really and truly, just so, we're putting it out there because, like I said, we know so many investors are scared of this type of investment, and then the inspection is kind of scary as well, but it's really not. These are all things that you would do for a regular tenant anyway. You're going to have that.
You would hope.
Pretty much rent ready. You're going to have all of those things taken care of.
And I'm sure there's some individuals sitting out there who are like, oh, I don't make sure all my outlets are covered.
Or some people renting that are going, that's not
what I have here,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And you do. You've got to have some reasonable standard. I can tell you that every single inspector is different. And remember, these are government employees. So they've got a checklist that they're supposed to go down. But I found that showing up and being really nice and smiling
always goes a long way.
Imagine, and chatting them up a bit. Imagine, that is a great way to get them on your side.
Yeah.
So, again, it's not something that, there's nothing really, really automatic flagging. The locks, that was something that every single inspector always checked.
Yep.
Looking for trip hazards. Are things clean? And if they showed up and stuff wasn't clean, they'd oftentimes say, listen, can you just clean this? Maybe get these carpets shampooed.
Something.
I can come back in a couple days. I'm not going to flag it, but let's redo this. And they're like, I can see it's nice, but it could be cleaner.
Well, and that's just, again, common sense, people. Would you be okay living there? As far as the interior, is it clean enough for you? Then it's probably clean enough, I would assume.
Yeah, and it doesn't, I mean, you don't have to have fancy finishes, and again, they don't have a lot of choice.
Yep.
Which I know is terrible to say, but, if you're thinking, oh, you've got to put in granite countertops. No, you don't.
No.
You absolutely do not. So it's...
Well, we're not talking about a high-end rental. We're talking, we're talking about usually, like you said, lower income. So you want it to be a nice, safe house for a family.
Exactly. And if you do all that and follow basic code laws, I mean, just follow code.
Yep.
You're going to be able to get that through. Something else we need to touch on is recertification and inspection. So they will come back out a year later. Now, once they inspect it that first year, if anything goes wrong, like severely wrong, right? Like maybe the roof starts to leak or possibly water leak or some, any of those things. And the Section 8 tenant calls out the inspector, or the inspector comes out and determines, hey, that's not the tenant's fault, that's your fault.
It needs to get taken care of.
They'll give you usually 7 to 10 days to get that taken care of. Sometimes they only give you like 48 hours if it's something that's...
Well, if we're talking about like, a really bad flooding in the house or something like
Correct.
that, or, black mold.
Correct. Yeah.
Yep.
So if it's something that poses a health hazard to the tenant, they'll give you like 48 hours to take care of it. I've had that maybe happen one time, and it wasn't my fault.
Yep.
There was a storm, I had to get all of these windows, and doors had been blown, kind of broken out. And so I had to get those fixed.
Okay.
But again, that stuff happens. I would have done it anyways.
Yeah, you would have done it for a regular tenant.
So, yeah, exactly, right? So when you get to your annual reinspection, the tenant must say 60 days prior to the end of the lease that they want to move. So they have to give you 60 days notice. Here's a very important part. Most Section 8 tenants will have a tenant portion. And they went from anywhere from, I saw them, $22. I think one time I had a $4 tenant portion, all the way up to maybe $250, $300 a month. Quite a bit. If they owe you any money, they cannot move. And you get a form that said, hey, your tenant's asking to move. You need to sign this saying this tenant owes you no money. And if they owe you anything, you go, no, this tenant owes me X amount of dollars. And they'll be denied for being able to move, and they'll have to wait a whole year.
Oh, wow. Well, that is probably helpful. Like, I know whenever I'm writing my leases, my tenants are charged a trip fee if something goes out, or if they want, there is a trip fee, because they don't get charged it unless they don't let the people in. And then I have to pay a trip fee. So you're paying a trip fee. If you let the people in whenever they come out, well then, obviously I'm covering everything. If they have to come back out to do that, well then now that's on you.
Right.
So something like that.
Correct. Anything. So even if it's not their rent portion, or they did, something that you had to cover, the most important thing I can say about that is document as soon as it comes about. So like you would do like a monthly mortgage statement or a monthly rent statement, go, here's your rent bill, right? And this is what's on here now. Possibly they've got late charges. That counts as well. So anytime you send them one of those letters, copy their case manager, especially if it's showing like a running balance. I had one tenant who I actually loved. I loved her. She just let me know that she just moved out of a house that I had sold to somebody else a couple of years ago. She stayed in that house for 15 years.
Wow.
A big reason she did, because for the 7 years she was my tenant, she was constantly in arrears. And then she would catch up. Something would happen. She'd get her tax refund or...
Well, and so just to be clear, because we've been talking about guaranteed rent, so the government gives you that check, it gets deposited directly, and you don't have to worry about it. So when we're talking about maybe they're late on their rent, now we're talking about the government pays for a certain portion, and they're liable, the tenant's liable for maybe $100 or $200 or something like that.
So this tenant was liable for $50 a month, and she was not good at paying that. So all of a sudden she's behind, $400, and she just had no way to pay that. So that was what happened the first year. Then she got a promotion at work and started making more money. So her portion went up to $133. I don't know why I remember that number, but it had been 50 for a couple of years. Then it goes up to 133. Well, she got behind. She just wasn't paying it.
Yep.
So all of a sudden she's behind $1,000. And that just kind of went on. And I know that she had planned on moving a couple times, but she couldn't. But she couldn't. And, that coupled with coming up with that deposit for their next place is going to keep these tenants in there longer. And so if you can have, did I have properties where I had turnover every single year? Yes, absolutely I did. But I also had those where I had tenants staying 3 and 5 years and so on and so on. And so, and after a certain point, people are like, well, I'm just comfortable here. I don't want to move.
Well, you get kind of like all of us, you get settled in, you don't want to have to pick up and move everything again.
Right. Well, yeah. And they've decorated, and, after somebody's been there a couple of years, do you care if I, put this border up in my kitchen? Not really. Obviously, if they've been there 3 to 5 years, you're going to have to paint anyways.
Exactly.
When they move out, it's going to be a mess on the wall. So, go ahead. Let them paint.
Yeah.
And I've had tenants going, I'd really like to paint this. Would you mind? And I'm like, no, go ahead. And they're like, okay, we're going to put up an accent wall. I'm like, okay. It's, paint is cheap. And if you've got to come in and just spray the whole thing
which
white,
most of the time you do anyway.
White anyways, yeah. So again, that is kind of a trick for keeping Section 8 tenants. And getting them, it's that one little blurb, Section 8 welcome.
Yep. Well, if any of y'all have any questions, because that's really most of it, but the one key point, though, that we need to make is enforce your lease, that I don't think we've said yet, is be sure to enforce your lease, because and that goes across the board. I don't care if you're dealing with Section 8 or the regular tenants out there. If you're not enforcing your lease, then you lose ground if you're trying to get them removed or anything like that.
Well, and that goes, if you don't follow that contract that you've signed to the letter, you can go in front of a judge when you're actually trying to evict them and get them out of there. And he can, go, well, yeah, but they were okay when we didn't do these parts of the lease. And the judge will be like, is that true? And you're going to have to say yes. And it's kind of like, okay, so it's cool to enforce part of your lease and not the rest of it. So it is really important to enforce that lease. And that's one of the first things the housing authority is going to ask. Did you enforce your lease? Have you demanded this from them?
Yep.
We will do what we can, but you've got to enforce your lease to make sure that they're paying you.
Yep. Well, you guys, if y'all have any questions, do you have anything else to add as far as the Section 8?
No, here's another just quick little tip. If you did go and file eviction on them for non-payment of rent, they will lose their voucher. Even that little,
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, even that tiny little portion. So I had one, and she always paid it. But I sent her one notice that I was going to file eviction, and she had that money to me in like a day. I don't know where it came from. But in that case, I was super strict because she actually paid, the rent was maybe $1,100 a month, and she was paying like $700.
So her voucher was much less.
Exactly.
And just like everything else, like whenever you're dealing with the government, whether it's unemployment or anything, it is subject to and based on that individual and that individual circumstance. So that voucher that they get for Section 8 varies.
It does.
And that's one of the things that you brought up earlier is check their packet.
Yeah, check their packet and just ask questions. Mm-hmm. So, and it's easy to get a Section 8 tenant. You just got to put in Section 8 welcome and make it so it stands out bold. Their eye goes to it because they've been calling,
I know every time I list a rental, I get.
Do you accept checks? Do you accept vouchers?
Yep. I get at least a handful of calls.
Right. And so
asking.
after they've called and they've heard no 10, 20, 30 times, yeah, they're going to be looking for Section 8 welcome, and they're going to just be going
Just
and
make
calling
it easy
those.
to find.
Right. So doing that, making your deposit low, doing everything right, and providing a nice, clean, safe property and environment, and being able to fill out really like 6 forms. People freak out about filling out a form, and there's people to help you fill out those forms.
Yeah, I mean, you can call and have somebody walk you through it just like you can with your taxes. I know the first time I ever filled out franchise tax, I'm like, I don't know what to put here.
Right.
But then
Exactly.
you call and they walk you through it. So,
Yeah.
Anyway, I mean, most of this is just don't be afraid of investing in Section 8, or maybe now you've got a vacant property and going ahead and going, okay, we're open to it. We're open to renting this as a Section 8
Right now,
property
people should be.
It's a way to diversify your rentals for sure.
Well, and hedge your bet.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you know what? Great. If
Nothing happens and you're not affected, great.
Right. And we sail on through, and, economy's back up and running at full speed in the next next year or two. Awesome. Great. If not, you've got government paying you.
Did you almost
Yeah.
say decades?
Decades. There's some scary people out there saying a decade.
Yeah.
New York is ruined. LA is ruined. California, everything's ruined.
Forever. Anyway, I hope y'all enjoyed this. And if you have any questions whatsoever, just drop them in the comments and we will get back to you. We look at all the comments afterwards and try to get back to you and answer any questions that we possibly can. Feel free to like and share. We're growing our YouTube channel and we'd love for you to help us grow it. And I'm Jaylee Thompson with Texel Real Estate. Look forward to seeing y'all next week.
And I'm Kristen Gerst with Capricorn Mortgage Investments. And seriously, if you've got any questions about this, or you just want to have a nice little chat, it's fun. Put the comments down below, and I'll be checking it out. Hopefully, I'm tagged in them so I can see. Hey, I'll try to answer those questions as quickly as I possibly can.
Yeah. Y'all have a great weekend.
Bye.
Bye.